Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. Really glad you could join me today out here in the vegetable garden. You know, it's middle of August, and you know those humid days, you know, out here in the garden. And but it's also a time, you know, where you get to harvest a lot of your vegetables. And so today I thought I would harvest some of our beautiful sun gold cherry tomatoes. So thanks for joining me today out here in the garden. So I'm standing underneath my cattle panel trellis, and I planted two of these sun gold cherry tomatoes at the base of this trellis here. The trellis, the size is 50 inches by 16 feet long, and I used 4 of your fence T-posts, 2 on each side to anchor it to the ground. I also did a video on how to install this, but these cherry tomatoes have been growing up this trellis for the last couple of months, and now that it's middle of August, you know, they're really starting to ripen. And these cherry tomatoes are just so tasty and delicious. You know, you pop them right in your mouth, right off the vine. And so I thought we would harvest some of these today, and let's take a closer look at these beautiful sun gold cherry tomatoes. So let's take a closer look at these tomato plants. You can see I have 2 of them growing here at the base, one here on the right and one on the left. Then I also have some pretty vinca flowers planted. Good morning there, Bailey. And so it's nice, the morning sunshine is showering these with some nice light. But you can see how they're just flourishing here, growing up on the trellis. They look like grapes hanging there. But all these tomatoes just from 2 plants, and I'm not pruning these. Occasionally I'm pruning the suckers in between the leaf and the stem, like this here. Some of the smaller ones that develop on the vine here, but for the most part I just letting them do their own thing, letting them go wild. And you can just see how they're just growing right above this trellis. Just this morning I was out tying them down here on the other side. You can see them starting to make their way over to the other side of the trellis. I also have another area over on my garden structure that we'll take a look at, of another plant growing up that. So I have my wife's small basket here that I use for picking these or harvesting these sun gold cherry tomatoes. And again, just to be able to walk out in the garden and eat these right off the vine. And so if you happen to ever planted any of these sun gold cherry tomatoes, let me encourage you to plant these and then grow them up a trellis similar to this, and then you know, you can prune the first few feet of these to get them growing up the vine, but after that you can just let the main stems continue to grow up the trellis. And then, you know, I use some jute twine to tie my vines or stems to the trellis here. And you can also take these and just stick them in a freezer bag and then freeze these as you could any tomato. But these are nice. You can freeze them, and then you can also pop them out like ice cubes and just, you know, suck on them and then eat them, and they're delicious that way too. That's one of my favorite ways of doing these. This way you'll have them over into the winter, because this is going to produce hundreds of tomatoes. Most of the time these don't make it off the vine. I usually eat them off the vine before they make it into the house. But this summer I'm going to have so many that I'll be able to freeze a lot of them. Now I also have some yellow pear tomatoes growing up another trellis over there alongside another sun gold cherry tomato. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But the yellow pear ones, they're just starting to ripen right now, but these have been ripening for the last month. But lately, now that it's really getting hot, they're really starting to turn nice and golden. And so you can see I'm starting to get some in there. And so let's head over to the garden structure, and I'll show you where I have that other sun gold cherry tomato plant growing up alongside that. And then also on the other corner I have one growing that was a volunteer plant. Well, before we head over to the garden structure, I did mention we were going to stop here at the other cattle panel trellis that I have here. And on the right side I have this is where I have another sun gold cherry tomato plant growing. And then here on the left I have some of my yellow pear tomatoes growing up this on the left side. And so let's take a closer look at the yellow pear tomatoes growing up the vine. And you know, I also have some Asian yard-long beans growing up this. So on the right side I have one sun gold cherry tomato, and then the left the yellow pear, and then I have some beans growing up this as well. And you can see how they're just starting to take off, reaching for the sun. I have to get over here and tie some more of these to the trellis, but you can see these are the yellow pear variety right there. There were some, like I mentioned earlier, that were starting to turn yellow, but not like the sun gold cherry tomatoes. They're at least a month ahead of these yellow pear ones. And I did have one earlier, and they don't seem to be as sweet as the sun gold cherry tomatoes. Although I may have to let them really ripen and turn yellow. Maybe they'll be a little bit more sweeter. So follow me along and let's go over to the garden structure and look at those other two sun gold cherry tomatoes. Okay, so they're right here on the corner. This is my Malabar spinach growing up here, or climbing spinach on the left. And then here is the other sun gold cherry tomato plant that I planted there in like the third week of May. Now I grew one of these up here last year too, and it climbed up the side, over the top, and down the other side. So it was 14 feet long at least. And once they reach up top, I'm not going to be pruning those. But you know, what I use here is what I call the rope and twist method to support my tomato plant. You can see I just twisted it along the vine as it grew taller. And what you do is you just tie a knot down at the bottom along the base. And so it really works great for supporting your tomato plants. It's a nice, easy, and effective way of doing it. And then I just have a hook up top to support the rope. So let's take a look at this other tomato plant I have growing. And this here is my Thailand giant elephant ear. Supposedly these leaves will get about 5 feet high, and the plant will get about 9 feet tall, 9 feet wide. And so this other tomato plant is right here on this corner. This plant actually was a volunteer from last year. There was actually a couple volunteer tomato plants growing, and so I just chose the healthiest one, and I attached a piece of twine to the top of the trellis, and you can see I'm just training it also up the rope. But again, you can see the beautiful sun gold cherry tomatoes here hanging on the vine. And so I'm just going to harvest a few more of these and put them in the basket. You do want to make sure you pick them when they're nice and ripe. If they get overripe, they're going to start developing a little crack in them, but they're still really delicious. And again, these are something really easy to grow. So let me encourage you to think about growing sun gold cherry tomatoes in your garden if you haven't done so yet, because again, they're easy to grow and they just harvest so many tomatoes, and you know, you want to have a trellis for them to grow up so that they can just, you know, they'll grow 10, 12, 14 feet long, and so you do want to make sure you provide plenty of trellis length there for them to grow up. Like, that's why these cattle panel trellises work so good, because they're 16 feet long. And so I just have a few more here to pick here on the vine. And so I just have a few more to harvest here on the side. And you know, these are indeterminate tomato plants, which means they'll just keep on growing up until the frost. And you know, the other variety is the determinate or bush type tomato plants, which, you know, they can get 3 to 4 feet tall, but those tomatoes come in basically all about the same amount of time, which makes them ideal for canning. And but the indeterminate, you know, you want to have both in your garden. That way you'll have more tomatoes, you know, right up until your frost. And so anyhow, I just want to thank you for joining me today out here in the vegetable garden, harvesting these beautiful, tasty, and sweet sun gold cherry tomatoes. They're like nuggets of sweetness on the vine. So anyhow, I hope you have a wonderful day gardening, and until next time, this is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred.